Barnstaple, Sunday, September the 30th, 1935. North Devon will not forget its Lynton Express. The narrow gauge railway, it's long ceased to pay, winding among the borderlands of Exmoor, has been part of local life for more than 37 years.
There was real sadness, tinged with resignation, in the local paper. The whistle of a tiny, hard-working, narrow-gauge railway train would echo no longer across the green hills and valleys between Lynton and Barnstaple. The track was only 1 foot 11.5 inches wide, the engines midgets compared with the Southern Railway monsters they connected with at Barnstaple. But few railways could have been regarded with such affection. For the locals it was friend and helpmeet. For the holidaymakers it was the last thankful stage in a tiring journey before they reached the delights of the North Devon coast. Small it may have been, but its closure in the autumn of 1935 was a blow to the community, which should perhaps have served it as well as it had served them. Not surprisingly, railway promoters and engineers had so far avoided this hilly little corner, although intrepid Victorians had long discovered its romance and beauty. They were drawn to Lynmouth, with its rocky gorge leading down to the sea, and to its breezy twin village of Lynton, 500 feet above. But Barnstaple station was a journey of almost 20 miles, an ordeal by horse-drawn coach. They called it the English Switzerland. Lynton and Lynmouth were further than any other town in Britain from a railway line. This was Lorna Doone country, wild and timeless. It was in for a change, though, which wealth, determination and a vested interest would push through. In the eyes of this man, the alpine villages were ripe to be put on the map. Sir George Newnes was the publisher of the Sherlock Holmes stories and Titbits magazine. He'd built a grand house on the hill above Lynton before turning his gaze on the town itself. He'd sort of adopted the place. There were those, it must be said, who resented Sir George's vision of the future. But he built a splendid town hall, presented to the people of Lynton and Lynmouth forever. Sir George and Lady Newnes left their contribution to the community writ in tablets of stone. But above all, he dreamed of putting the town on the railway map. He realized his ambition, but it was not to be forever. His first achievement has endured. The cliff railway he built still saves a climb of 500 feet. Twin cable cars, powered only by water, link Lynton with Lynmouth down below. Sir George's next objective was Barnstaple and the world.
The North Devon Herald, Thursday, September the 19th, 1895. Amid demonstrations of great enthusiasm, the first sod of the Lynton and Barnstaple Railway was on Tuesday cut by Lady Newnes. The procession arrived at the Shambleway Head punctually, and the scene here was of a very attractive character. Lady Newnes, amid cheers, then proceeded to cut the first sod. Her ladyship performed the function with aptness and becoming grace. Having completed this duty, Lady Newnes said,
"It gives me great pleasure to cut this sod today, and I wish to say how heartily I wish every success to the Lynton and Barnstaple Railway."
For 2 years, an army of navvies battled to cut a track bed through this quiet corner of Devon along the edge of Exmoor. Sir George was a champion of narrow-gauge railways, which could avoid the need for major earthworks by winding their way around the contours of the land, cutting costs. But this terrain tested the railway builders to the limit.
You can sing of your soldiers and sailors, of the heroes who follow the drum, but for great feats of might and of daring, a new race of giants has come. They call us the bold navigators, hard-drinking, hard-fighting and strong. There are no finer boys in the nation, and I'll tell of the deeds that we've done.
The share issue had been oversubscribed, such was local enthusiasm. The line was built to the highest standards, but alarmingly, costs doubled. The contractor was bankrupted, although the work was finished. The coffin would be 37 years in the making, but this was the first nail.
The Ilfracombe Chronicle, May the 14th, 1898. There is considerable novelty about the new railway which has just been completed between Barnstaple and Lynton, and which was formally opened on Wednesday. The starting point was naturally Barnstaple. The station itself wore that peculiarly festive appearance which only hundreds of bannerets and flags can give, together with a judicious use of evergreens.
When the line opened in 1898, John Rich was a little boy of 5.
Well, you see, I was born May 2nd, 1893. And I suppose I was about 5 years, but I could remember things that were happening in those days better than I could remember things that happened last year. The railway, what I remembered at first as a boy, the main street in Lynton would be decorated up by these are wooden arches. The arches crossed over the street. They were all lit up. And then in the afternoon we had sports, and you went to your school for a tea.
Sir George Newnes, who was received with prolonged cheering, expressed the thanks of himself and the other directors for the friendly way in which they had been given a send-off to that interesting little railway. He hoped it would lead to an increase in the prosperity of the people of Barnstaple, as well as of those of Lynton. He hoped the people of Barnstaple would take advantage of the line and visit the breezy heights of their little alpine village at the end of it. The party were for a few minutes subjected to the will of the photographer, and then the miniature carriages of the first Lynton train were invaded to the accompaniment of cheers upon cheers from the thousands of people assembled.
The neat little train, its tiny wheels almost hidden under the frames, was an instant hit. It was a line full of character. Sir George had indeed redrawn the railway map.
A big demonstration was awaiting the party at Lynton. Screams from the engine whistle, fog signals and lusty cheers on all hands heralded the arrival of the first train. It stopped outside the station, for a terrible obstruction in the shape of 3 silk ribbons suspended from posts either side of the line barred progress. Lady Newnes alighted from the train in company with the directors and others, and with a skillful cut severed the challenging bands in time to allow the train to pass. The cheering was deafening, and the striking up of the bands simultaneously added to the din. Photographers, amateur and professional, vied with each other to secure the choicest snaps and to gain records of one of the most exciting and thrilling sights ever seen in Lynton or the vicinity.
All that I can remember is the part of that there hill being crowded with people, and then we had to go down to the school to enjoy our tea, and then we went out and had fun in the sports field. When the train came into being first, we thought it was a marvel, you know.
Mr. Medway secured the first return ticket against strong competition, but as he confided to his daughter, he didn't want to lose it again to the ticket collector at Lynton.
So my father, when he got back to that turn, where you come down Dean Street now, he jumped out of the carriage, you see, and because they slowed down to come round the bend, and he jumped out of the carriage and ran down over the woods, you see, and kept his ticket. That's how he did it.
In fact, nipping on and off without a ticket proved to be rather too easy on the quieter stretches of the Lynton, but the mainline station at Barnstaple at least tried to look as if company rules were being taken seriously. Passengers must not cross the line. The landscape dictated that then as now, the population was somewhat scattered, Barnstaple being always the main centre. For the line to succeed, those 7 little stations along it were going to have to be well patronised. Twisting and turning, it climbed 1,000 feet to its highest point at Woody Bay Station, before descending 300 feet to Lynton. The wayside stations were charming, yet like Brecon Fleming, often well away from the villages they served. Blackmore Gate, built like a Swiss chalet, was, if anything, out of scale with the handful of houses nearby and the narrow track. Paracombe was given nothing better than an open shed. Strange, as it was the only village of any size en route. But it had failed to welcome the railway with open arms, so Sir George Newnes banished it to the status of a mere halt without even a goods siding. Woody Bay was grander, but like many Victorian stations was a destination in name only. Woody Bay itself was 2 miles away and almost 1,000 feet below. But Sir George confidently predicted a great future and a short connecting branch line for this rising watering place. Neither materialised. At last, the terminus, 1.5 hours and 20 miles after leaving Barnstaple. Lynton had 2 platforms and a goods shed. The passengers were only too happy to reach journey's end. "Lynton, Lynton!" shouted the station master. But just a moment. Tired and weary, the travellers were in for a shock. There was no sign of the town. Lynton was there, but a good 200 feet below and half a mile from the station, down a steep, rough road. So as not to be a blot on the landscape, the station had been built behind this hilltop, out of sight of the town, and incidentally, far from being an intrusion on the view from Sir George Newnes' own house. And so it was either a horse bus or Shanks's pony down to Lynton and the cliff railway to Lynmouth and the sea. An obvious solution would have been an extension of the cliff railway track, but it was never built. Undaunted, however, the visitors came in. The 2 villages flourished and the railway settled down to become part of the local way of life. But there was no speeding up of the service and there were constant financial problems. Sir George Newnes died in 1910. There was a brief excursion into profitability, but then things began to slide. Maintenance was neglected, debts mounted, and in 1923 the company was swallowed up by the Southern Railway. At once there were improvements. There was a new engine, Loo, and the delights of the line were cheerfully promoted to the tourists.
You will get to Barnstaple town in time for an early cup of tea, which will be ready for you on the platform. There is a change of trains, a change of a most astonishing and amusing kind. Sitting complacently at the opposite side of your platform, looking rather self-conscious because you are staring incredulously at it, is what appears to you a toy train. But it has a blustering little engine up in front which seems impatient to depart, and they are in fact busy round a little guard's van with your luggage, so you laugh and get into it.
It was a novelty, but Stanhope Baker, who rode on and photographed the line in 1935, had great respect for it.
One of the popular conceptions of the line was that it was a toy railway, which was of course not the case at all really. It was properly constructed, properly built and man enough for the job. And it lasted all those years without any trouble at all. And I must admit that when I got out at Barnstaple and just crossed the platform from the standard gauge train into the Lynton and Barnstaple line, which was standing in the other platform, apart from the fact that it was very much smaller, I was quite ready for that. It was absolutely all right. It didn't appear to be a toy train at all to me. Not long after the start, you stop apparently in the middle of a field for no apparent reason, and you hear a voice call out something like "Snabber halt, Snabber halt," and you realise you're at Snapper Halt. And you look out the right-hand side of the train, you can see just a little shelter, I think, and a name board, that's all. And then you go up the valley, and it's nice to sit on the left-hand side because you get a nice view of Cheltenham Viaduct, which appears to be actually broadside onto you, but you swing round in a sharp left-hand curve over the viaduct and into the little station at Cheltenham. Beautiful little station, all amongst trees and rhododendrons and this sort of thing, and all the sunshine and shadows. And one of the most beautiful little stations I've ever seen, really. Really was delightful. A lot of country branch lines had this atmosphere up to a point, But the L&B, I think, being of the 1 foot 11.5-inch gauge, had something the others hadn't got. And you can't describe atmosphere, but it was just it was just very nice.
Imagine you leave in London, say tonight, and you're going to run down so far as Exeter, then on to Barnstaple. Well, I'll tell you what you'd already bought. You'd already bought your daily newspaper. It might have been the Daily Mail, it might have been the Daily News, me newspaper, you see. Well, then you'd leave them newspapers in them little carriages up on a little luggage rail on the top. Me. Then the old lady here at Lynton railway station, she'd go right through that train about 20 past 12 before the train went. She'd collect up all them newspapers, take them into the railway station, into the station house, put them through the mangle, and then they'd go down to Lynton to be sold again. You see, she was up for business.
By and large, I found the staff very obliging. They took a pride in their job. I think there's no doubt about that. All the stations were beautifully kept and the track was beautifully kept. It was all generally friendly and thoroughly pleasant atmosphere. Out of this world, we can't describe it really. It's got an absolute atmosphere of its own. It was delightful.
I went to school on it, to the grammar school at Barnstaple. A whole team of us used to go up, you know, and the porters, if we were late, they'd come up and shout to us coming up the hill, because we had to walk right up to the top, you see. Come on, you girls, come on, you girls. You know, they're so good to us.
When I was at Barbrook School, we used to bring up to the station the red library books and collect 2 boxes of the new editions for us children to read. We used to sit in class and turn our heads around and see the train going around the top of Kibsworthy. And the teacher used to say to us, "You've seen it before, now pay attention to what I'm saying."
Going back to school, we used to gather up the snow, which Mr. Passmore, the guard, would say, "You boys not getting the seats wet, are you?" "Oh no, Mr. Passmore." And then it was quite normal to shut one of the boys out, and he'd run the length of the platform, easily keeping up with the train, and then leap aboard. It used to accelerate to probably 10-15 miles an hour, and then of course you'd hear the vacuum brakes go on because there were so many curves on it. And I believe, I don't know if I'm right, but I think it was the more bridges, viaducts and whatnot than any other stretch of the railway for its length.
As time went on, they put drivers there that drove other trains. The train was always running off the line. You know, they'd send out another one to fetch you, sort of style. It was quite a Heath Robinson affair.
They had one rogue set of bogies, and if they used that truck, you can bet your bottom dollar that it used to come off the track. But I can remember them saying, "Oh, train's late again because it's come off the track," and blimmin' old bogies.
The Little Wheels did leave the track quite frequently, but in its 37 years, the Lynton and Barnstaple never killed or even injured a single passenger. The odd derailment was tolerated patiently. Hopping on and off the train was, after all, part of the fun, and could save you the price of a ticket.
Us never used to pay because I used to go out there Kingsbury Wood and he'd come along and she'd open the door, jump on and get off before he got the coffins. Out through the wood there, he'd be crawling. Oh, that's where she used to go out there picking primroses, jump off a train, pick a bunch of primroses and jump on again. Yeah. You know, it was a bit of a climb out there for him because he was puffing a bit, you know.
Yeah. He used to go puffety, 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 puffety. I think I can do it, I think I can do it, I think I can do it. Yes, I've done it. I've done it, I've done it, I've done it, you know. That's what we always used to put the rhythm to the puffing of the engine.
He'd be going along a nice but comfortable speed one time and all of a sudden he'd come to incline and he'd go right down. I'll make it, I'll make it.
If you were on the back end of it, as you were going round a corner, you could wave to the driver.
Not used to drive the train. Bloke called Not.
Not, yes.
Big fat bloke he was. Yeah, well, Not always had his head out.
Halfway through a carriage, they used to have 4 seats. And the sides were empty. There was no glass, no nothing there. And you used to be able to sit and see everything that was going along, and that was their observation car. We used to have quite a good bit of fun on that one, because you see, you were able to hold your hand out and see if you could pick anything going along.
And when you came in past Barbrook, or before Barbrook, further up on Winter Top, and you saw all the lovely, lovely hills, it was beautiful.
Oh, glorious. Beautiful.
Really
the further you went, the better it got. Yeah.
Really lovely.
You could look for miles over the field, and see the cows and the pigs then in the mud.
And the scenery is just the same today as it was 100 years ago. Nothing disturbed.
The memory of the disastrous flood of 1952, when a raging torrent filled the gorge and swept away houses in Lynmouth, still lingers in the area. But in the 1930s, there was nothing much to disturb the peacefulness of that lovely English Switzerland. But if anyone had cared to listen, the chuffety-chuffety of those little narrow-gauge trains was telling a different story. The family motor car was opening up the Devon byways. Trippers came by car, while the locals used the bus to Barnstaple. They didn't lose their affection for the line. They simply forgot to use it. Only freight still showed a profit. But it wasn't enough. By now, the railway was losing £5,000 a year and fighting for its life.
Here it was, high summer, July 1935, and I could only always get a compartment to myself. This was the thing, there was no passenger traffic to speak of. And this was within a couple of months or so of the end of the railway.
Soon the first whispers of closure began to circulate. In Sir George Newnes Town Hall, Lynton Council began a belated scramble to save the railway. In Barnstaple, a protest meeting was called. The Lynton delegation came by car. It was quicker, and anyway, there wasn't a late train back. The Southern Railway management in London listened, but weren't swayed. The little train's sentence was confirmed. The line would close at the end of the 1935 summer season. Suddenly, it was all over. No more picking primroses or jumping on without paying. Only formal handshakes and brave smiles as the funeral party assembled for the last trip to Lynton. Briefly, the railway was national news. The Times sent a photographer. The Morning Post reporter travelled on the final train.
The passengers cheered and the watchers in the streets and windows echoed them. Still with the whistle going, we came up through the valleys where the hillsides seemed to fold and overlap before us. Every village had turned out to watch the last train pass. We were cheered at Chelfham, Bratton Fleming, Blackmore, Parracombe and Woody Bay. So we passed away towards Lynton through the windy blue and white morning.
My husband and I wouldn't go up to the last. We couldn't, no. A lot of people did. I mean, I suppose we had so many routes here, you know, we didn't like to see it going.
My father broke his heart because he helped cut the track from here to the bend on Dean Steep. He broke his heart about it. But the platform here that day was absolutely crowded with people. You couldn't have got another person on the platform here to see the last train out. I was up there myself and saw it. Really crowded it was. And everybody was so sorry about it. And I heard someone say, there, if they'd turned out like this once every so often, we would have done better. Daft, wasn't it?
That's a sure thing.
Not since that optimistic day in May 1898 when the line opened had there been such a crowd. Many had been present at the baptism and also turned up for the burial. But it was too late. The Lynton and Barnstaple was already slipping into history.
The final incident, semi-comic, semi-tragic, was the laying of a wreath composed of bronze and yellow chrysanthemums on the line on Monday. Mr. Charles Ford, Barnstaple Southern Railway station master, placed the wreath on the stop block of the Lynton line. A black-edged mourning card bore the inscription, "To Barnstaple and Lynton Railway with regret and sorrow, from a constant user and admirer. Perchance it is not dead, but sleepeth." O little train to Lynton, no more we see you glide among the glades and valleys and by the steep hill's side. The fairest sights in Devon were from your windows seen, the moorlands, purple heather, blue sea and woodland green. And onward like a river in motion winding slow, through fairylands enchanted thy course was wont to go, where still the hills and valleys, in sunshine and in rain, will seem to wait forever the coming of the train.
I've always been fascinated by steam engines, and steam became very much a way of life. There was always this fascination with railways and trains and engineering. If my railway with a wave of a magic wand could become the Lynton and Barnstaple, and one could turn back the clock and just buy all the bits and pieces, which after all were sold very, very cheaply, and just somehow bring Lynton and Barnstaple back to life.
Travelling in a steam train is like being pulled along by a horse. It's as if it's alive. It snorts. You can feel it pulling. The rattle of the wheels is like the clicking of the hooves, and your seat sways around underneath you. The sensation's strongest on the small-scale narrow-gauge railways, run mostly these days for holidaymakers, like this one in the Brecon beacons. And the smaller and quainter they are, the more we enjoy the ride. Well, some of us do. 50 years ago, narrow gauge railways were being sold for scrap. Now they're being searched out and put back to work, some by companies, some by railway societies.
Any tickets, please?
And a few by determined individuals. This tiny railway has been rebuilt from scratch at Launceston in Cornwall by Nigel Bowman and his wife, not Lillian, but Kay.
Narrow gauge railways were fascinating to me because of the equipment that they used. Always looked a little bit quainter and a little bit odder than the main lines. And narrow gauge wound off into the country. It went up mountains, it went through valleys, it went round sharp corners and up steep gradients. And that blending of the countryside and railways is to me very attractive. I'd gone to North Wales and stumbled across Penryn slate quarries. Although it was closed, there were a few engines still for sale. And when I found that one of the engines was available for only £60, that was just too good to miss.
I rebuilt her between 1964 and 1968, and then she was doing nothing for years and years until we got the railway off the ground in 1983. Since then, she's done about 12,000 miles, and this winter we shall be giving her a big overhaul.
My career was school teaching, and with a railway engine which needs a lot of work doing on it to get it into good working order, then any career really pales into insignificance.
Nigel Bowman's railway is the result of 10 years' hard work. It's the realisation of his personal dream, inspired by one of the best-loved and most sadly missed narrow-gauge railways of the past, the Lynton and Barnstaple in North Devon, which closed in 1935.
I think the Lynton and Barnstaple Railway is very evocative in as much as it's remembered by old illustrations, sepia photographs, snips of cine film which people took just before it closed. And we all look back at those illustrations of it and the memories of it. And it's very clear that it was such a fine railway, but it does, in a way, it's an inspiration to people who are running narrow gauge railways.
A wealthy Victorian publisher, Sir George Newnes, who'd built a large house at Lynton, was the impetus behind the line. It opened in 1898 to much local rejoicing. The little trains had to work hard on the difficult route between Lynton and Barnstaple, but justified Sir George's faith in narrow gauge railways.
We'd look back now on the Lynton and Barnstaple as something very quaint, but in its day it was a real leader. The locomotives that it used were quite the most modern that were available then, and everything about the line was extremely well done. The whole railway was very much a main line in miniature. I think the special thing about the Lynton is it was very much its own railway. It was built by local people for local people. It was built as a tourist project to carry people to Lynton, and it did that in a very charming and picturesque way through beautiful countryside. But at the same time, it was a real railway. It connected with the main line, and it had a real role to play.
The line closed in 1935, not because it didn't prove itself. It simply fell victim to the motor car. A wreath was laid on the stop block at Barnstaple station. The inscription, "To Barnstaple and Lynton Railway with regret and sorrow from a constant user and admirer. Perchance it is not dead, but sleepeth." It was a sad day, but what a brave face they put on it. You'd have thought it was their first day at work, rather than their last. That young man squatting by the wreath was Fred Kidwell, a fitter at the Pilton depot in Barnstaple.
This was the carriage sheds back in the old days.
Yes.
And that was the good shed.
I see.
For the office.
Yeah. And that was 1925.
Yes, and before.
Yeah. And this was all carriage sheds then.
Yeah, right through.
51 years after that photograph, Fred Kidwell went back to his workplace for the first time since the line closed and the rails were ripped up. Talking with the present owner, that yard was suddenly all bustle again.
And the lines came round?
We used to have the goods roads up through here.
No forklift trucks at the main depot in those days. They employed over 30 men here. It was really the freight that provided the line's bread and butter, right to the end, until road transport took the trade. What wouldn't enthusiasts give, though, to put that neat little railway train back on its tracks? It was at the Pilton depot that they were kept and serviced.
I was 16 when I started here in July 1925. Cleaning engines. That was my first job of cleaning. 28 shillings in the July when I started. I had a birthday in December and I went up to 32 shillings. If you was working on a railway, you was sure of a job. And that was the main thing that you had to worry about, wasn't it? Back in those days, was getting a job and keeping it. But out here, there was 2 pits where the engines used to come in to be serviced, to clean the fires, do the axle, the ash pan, and the smoke box door.
And the ash used to go in the pit, did it?
Oh, in the pit. And that's where the examination used to take place.
Yeah.
Then they used to run them into the shed.
Is that the marks there where the lines used to?
This is the actual gauge, which was my father's, because he was the ganger on this length of railway.
It's very narrow.
1 foot 11 and a half. This was the sheds where the engines were stored during the night, and you could see where the chutes were right down through, where the chimneys used to be right opposite. To take all
the beams are still sooty, half a century since an engine stood there. There were 5 of them in all, named after West Country rivers: Exe, Lynn, Yeo, Tor and Lou. Their careers came to an end on the 29th of September 1935. It was all such a shock when it happened.
I was in that engine shed that morning and the governor came in from Exmouth Junction. He said, "Good morning, lads. Well, I'm come to close you up."
And that was it. Within a few weeks, the entire railway had been auctioned off, to scrap merchants mainly. It was like the breakup of a marriage, with outsiders picking over the family treasures. The pain of it, to see lot numbers slapped on all that lovingly polished brass and paintwork.
Including 16 3/4 miles of track, signal and telegraph apparatus, 5 tank locomotives, 17 8-wheel passenger carriages, 19 open goods wagons, 10 covered goods wagons, 3 8-ton goods brake vans, plate layers trolleys, turntable, portable cranes, weighbridge, repair Lot 13, a 242 outside cylinder side tank locomotive, Lynn, number 762 by Baldwin's Loco Works, USA. Total weight, working order, 22 tons. Spares, 8 tyres, 9 springs, 16 mouthpiece protectors and 4 brass bearings. Sold for £50.
Unlucky 13. In a few days, Lynn and 3 of her sisters were dismembered. Just over £50 apiece, that's all.
I think all of us who are involved in narrow gauge, if we could just turn the clock back and rescue some of the stuff from that auction. Certainly the rolling stock, when it was sold, wasn't run down. It wasn't dilapidated. It was in perfect condition. It was a railway in tip-top shape, ready to run. And what was it sold for? It was sold for summer houses, for chicken sheds, for garden shelters. And these superb carriages were just left out to moulder.
The signal box went, but one of the locomotives escaped the blowtorch. That was Lou, knocked down to work for a coffee plantation in Brazil. No more was heard of her, and some say she's still there. 3 carriages survived. One was burnt in the 1960s, another's on a preserved railway line altered out of all recognition. But this one spent 50 years in the garden of a rectory. If only that coach full of clerics had prayed a little harder and a little earlier. For his few pounds, the rector got a first-class observation saloon, a third-class compartment, a guard's van and a dog box. But, praise be, it was saved, and waits to be restored in the York Railway Museum. It would take thousands just to return the first-class saloon to its former glory. It's a classic example of Victorian coach building, before formica replaced mahogany, and air conditioning took over the job of a leather strap to let the window down. Andrew Dow helped to organise its rescue in 1982. He made a sentimental journey to York with Stanhope Baker, who half a century before had spent a happy summer holiday riding the Lynton line.
You know, it was
Over 50 years you last travelled on the Lynton and Barnstaple, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was in the last months of its life, 1935. And I actually travelled in this coach once, I remember. Yes.
1898 it was built.
Yes, yes.
In Lawrence Hill in Bristol.
Really? Mm.
In a Bristol Carriage and... No, I must get the name right. The Bristol Wagon and Carriage Works Company Limited. In fact, there's a little plate up there.
It's still there, is it?
Yes, indeed it
okay.
is. The common thinking is that these coaches were the best available on narrow gauge.
They must have been quite high class, I would think, yes. It's all scaled down mainline stuff, isn't it, really? The luggage racks and even the photographs above the seats there.
And when it's restored, expensively I don't doubt, it really will be a lovely coach.
Yes. And the sideways seating allows the passengers to look out straight ahead of him, as it were, instead of as an angle. Oh, sitting here, it brings it back to me. Amazingly.
Does it?
Oh, indeed, yes.
Yes. You can feel it sway beneath your feet, can you?
Yes, it did rattle a little bit when I was travelling in it on that short distance, because it was the last coach in the train, and
yes.
It wagged a little bit, but not bad, not very pleasant.
Yes.
And a beautiful view.
The view is still much the same, but could any part of this line ever be restored, really? Most of it's vanished into the landscape. Here at Chelfham, though, you can see that once there was a railway. Chelfham Viaduct had been the costliest structure on the line to build. It took over 250,000 bricks. It's already listed as an ancient monument, though British Rail would no doubt gladly sell it off to anyone prepared to keep it up. Today, there would be plenty of buyers for the whole line. Our misfortune was that the Lynton closed down too early. If only... oh well.
I think there's no doubt that if the line had somehow survived the war years until, say, the early 1950s, it would still be with us today.
The fact is, though, that ever since the wreath was laid on its grave, its ghost has haunted the enthusiasts. Could we ever see a locomotive rescued from the Brazilian jungle chuffing along any part of a revived Lynton to Barnstaple railway line? Could the spirit of Sir George Newnes wave his chequebook over the old station inn and transform it back into Blackmore Gate Station? Perchance it is not dead, but sleepeth. It isn't impossible to find the old wayside platforms where only rattling milk churns and an approaching train disturb the peace. They're still there, drowning under willow herb and bracken, but now Woody Bay Station is just a cottage in a wood. It almost came back to life in the early 70s when Nigel Bowman was searching for somewhere to start his railway.
The first place we looked, obviously, was the legendary Lynton and Barnstaple line. In places, you could have virtually cut down the trees and laid the track. It was intact. But any line which has been closed for a number of years, little bits have been sold off. And although there were short stretches which could have had a railway put on them, it would have been extremely difficult to buy back all pieces of land and to have persuaded the Highways Authority that they'd really got to undo their road improvements and put the railway back. We looked long and hard at the Lynton and Barnstaple, and eventually, and very sadly, decided that we couldn't do anything economically on the site, although we could quite see that it would be possible.
But not everybody took the same view. Lynton was Bill Pryor's favourite station and his favourite bit of railway history. He bought it and at once set about living his own legend. Mr. and Mrs. Essery were once regular passengers here. Bill Pryor loves to swap stories with people who knew the line.
Yeah. The train used to go through the middle of that
come
house.
in. Okay. Yeah. They are. This used to be the office of the station
Yeah,
master.
that's right, yeah.
Yeah,
And then the waiting room.
No. Oh, yes, Lynton Limiter. Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
Look there.
There are. 1911. Yeah. That's for my down.
We'll catch that one next week.
That's it.
We'll get that one
Yeah.
next week, shall we?
you remember the old bookstall in there?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
W.H. Smith's?
Yeah.
That's where you used to come and pick up the papers mornings, no.
We don't want them on here because they're too big. We would still prefer to have our little one.
That was
Yes.
the ticket office.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
now the bathroom
Yeah.
of the house.
All right.
There's the old Edward VII box.
Yeah. I didn't remember each of that.
I do. I remember that one. Yes, quite easy. Quite easy.
Yeah.
It's beautiful to be up here, though, now again to see.
Of course, there wasn't no
what
rabbit out
remains.
here then.
That's true.
It is lovely to see something being used up.
Yeah,
That's,
Oh.
that's the waiting room.
With a
Good,
black
lovely.
stove in the middle.
General room, isn't it? Lovely. Isn't it really beautiful?
Yeah.
To see it all so nice again. Lovely.
It's good.
Takes you back to
Way
what it
out.
was.
When we go out the other side, well then there was the Lynton and
Sign.
Limerick place, a big sign.
Yes, that was on the other platform, yes.
And down where the laurels be used to be the signal box.
That's it.
And up over was the water tank.
That's it. And the engine
yes,
shade.
That's
that's
right.
it, yes.
Oh, the engine shades under highways.
That's it.
They had two platforms here, one for the one passenger in general, and then one they used to shunt along the odd bits and pieces,
Yes.
waiting to be hooked up to the back of the general.
And there used to be a seat you could sit on.
But it's all gone.
All gone, yeah.
Maybe, for now anyway. Bill Pryor can't accept that it'll be forever.
Hopefully, maybe in the distant future, a section of the old line will be reopened as a tourist attraction. It would do extremely well. It'd bring a lot of wealth to the area and try to recreate the most famous narrow gauge railway.
This is how the track looked just north of Brecon Fleming in the 1930s. 2 bends and one of the 80 bridges on the climb to Lynton. It has changed a bit. It may be a little overgrown, but it is a railway again. David Moore is someone else with a grand obsession about something he never really knew. He owns about half a mile of the track bed, and on it he's busy building his own Lynton and Barnstaple railway. The gauge of his track is just 7 1/4 inches, about a third of the original. The engine, Brecon, he built himself. The track he also laid. His reward is to stoke up his imagination until he's at the controls of one of Lynton's tough little tank engines, pounding up the bank to Blackmore Gate. David spends most weekends like this. It's a satisfying feeling to be on the footplate of your own engine, even though it's a bit cramped. He has no plans to tap the tourist market. This is a purely private world. Playing trains? Certainly. But Brecon is no toy. At half a ton, it can pull 8 times its own weight. David Moore's next locomotive will be even more powerful, a scaled-down miniature of Tor, an original Lynton engine. For some, this would never be enough. The urge to rebuild the railway as it was is too strong. It must be the original 1 foot 11.5-inch gauge carrying tourists again. At Lynton, near Barnstaple, hidden under scrapped symbols of what put them out of business in the first place, are some more enduring items of railway hardware. This is the base of the Lynton and Barnstaple Railway Association. It's run by Clarence Delacourt.
The main aim of the society is to open so much of the old L&B railway as we possibly can. We'll never open all of it, obviously, but we're mainly concerned with a small section, possibly 2 to 3 miles. We've got a locomotive, we've got 10 railway wagons of our own, we've got sections of the old L&B carriages, a lot of equipment, a lot of rail, a lot of sleepers. We're very confident we'll get a section reopened in the next 2 years. It will be the main tourist attraction for the Barnstaple area, definitely.
It may seem far-fetched, but it's already been done elsewhere.
If one was going to look around for a line to say this line is being done in the same way that the Lynton and Barnstaple was, one would certainly look at the Brecon Mountain Railway and put it probably at the top of the list, because it uses very substantial track, very heavy rails, very well laid, and the rolling stock in many ways is not dissimilar. And everything about the Brecon Railway has been done to achieve the best, the station facilities in particular. And I think one would draw a parallel there with the Lynton and Barnstaple Railway, which in its day was certainly at the forefront of railway technology.
The Brecon Mountain Line is one of the great little trains of Wales. Every year it delights 40,000 passengers. Yet only 10 years ago, it was a wilderness, just like the Lynton and Barnstaple. All it needed was vision, money and ability. Three things possessed by Tony Hills.
What's the cost compared to bush-plated joints? Any idea?
Well, they say it's £40 a joint, you see.
As much as that?
Tony Hills discovered the route of the old Brecon and Merthyr Railway. He discovered that at about the same time, but I discovered a section of the North Cornwall Railway. And being a practical engineering sort of chap, it's no wonder that he started a railway in much the same way that we have in Cornwall.
Tony, she's enormous. She must be the biggest narrow gauge engine in this country.
Well, as far as I know, she's the biggest 2-foot gauge loco ever built. There were quite a few built of this type for the South African railways. But it weighs 61 tonne with coal and water on.
And you've recently brought her back from South Africa?
That's right, yes. She's been here since March, and we hope to have her running before too long. But of course we've got to strip all the lagging off. The boiler's got to be inspected. We've got to get a boiler certificate.
One of the problems about railways of about 2-foot gauge is shortage of equipment. 20 years ago, stuff was available in England, mostly with an industrial background. That source of supply quite suddenly dried up, and not surprisingly, people started looking overseas, and Tony Hills has taken the bull by the horns and imported a large South African Bayer Garrett locomotive, which is now on the Brecon Railway.
But when we started on this, Tony, stuff was comparatively cheap, wasn't it? I paid £60 for an engine for one of the world's slate quarries.
That's right, those were the days, weren't they?
That's right.
Yeah, the Sybil here, I bought that in 1963, and I think I paid £80 for it or something. I mean, it was a bit of a stake then, mind you.
Good investment.
I suppose so.
But what are we talking about today for even a small working steam locomotive in fair condition for a narrow gauge railway?
Well, the thing is that you say in working condition. Well, I suppose in that case you're talking of perhaps £10,000.
Exactly.
A wreck you might get for £5,000.
So the costs are high, but then for Nigel Bowman, the rewards are great.
So many of your senses are stirred by a steam engine. You can smell it, you can hear it, you can see it. And it's very much alive, even when it's not moving, there's something going on. It's warm, it makes a sort of crackling noise as water drops onto hot surfaces. There's a smell of warm oil. There's something very magical about it. It's an incredibly straightforward, simple machine. And because it's so straightforward and simple, it's also beautiful. It's made of straightforward materials, brass and cast iron and steel. And yet, crudely fitted together, this very crude machine can work so well and achieve so much.
To the new generation, born into a high-tech world, steam trains are a mystery.
They look at a steam engine for the first time, and it looks very large, and it's an awe-inspiring object. And they step back, and perhaps they're a little bit frightened, but then gradually they edge closer and closer, and within half an hour, they don't want to leave it. And I'm sure that they go away from these little tourist railways, and all they want to do is to come back or go to another one. And that's it, they're hooked. There's a lot of parallels with looking at the tourists getting onto the train at Pant Station on the Brecon Mountain Railway. You can just imagine that was really not so very different from tourists getting onto the train at Lynton station, embarking on a journey. And as the train winds off round the corner, you get a glimpse of what promises to be a very attractive journey through beautiful countryside behind a steam engine. And that's really not so very different, I would have thought, from the emotions that a tourist would have experienced with a ride on the Lynton and Barnstaple Railway, maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago. The differences are, of course, that the Brecon Railway, as with so many today, is a recreation of what the Lynton and Barnstaple was all about. It's a recreation, in a way it's a caricature, but it's an extremely accurate one. It's no mock-up using artificial equipment. It's no amusement park thing. Everything about it is real. The locomotives are real, the rolling stock is real, the track bed itself has got a history, and when it comes to it, even the rails have got a history. But it's been assembled together to make a recreation of something that was there before. I think the man behind the Lynton and Barnstaple Railway, Sir George Newnes, would, if he's looking down on the Brecon, feel a great rapport with it. I'm sure he'd be saying to himself, well, there we are, my ideas were absolutely right. A narrow gauge railway in beautiful countryside is what people want. There's something about the railway. It's an era which has vanished. We're looking back to the days when people went on holiday not by car but by train, and I think a lot of us, of course, still remember that. But even those who don't still capture a magic from the railways, and the number of people who are interested, the number of holiday makers who ride on preserved railways is a testimony to the fact that Sir George Newnes was absolutely right.